everybody. It is January 2025, and it is the first 2025 episode of Beyond the Drip. I want to welcome you to our podcast about all things infusion called Beyond the Drip. And so thankful that you're back with us for the first episode of the year. I'm here with my amazing co-host. So I'm going to go from left to right from my screen. I've got Brandon Carpenter from MedEdge. Hi, Brandon. How are you?
Hey, John. Happy 2025.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got Paula Roth, our newest member from ProChant. Hi, Paula.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Paula, we're so excited to have you here with us.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got Pam McIntyre. Pam is from Expert Nursing Solutions. Hi, Pam. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And last but not least, Brian O'Sullivan, owner and principal of O'Sullivan Group. Hey, Brian.
Hey, John. Thanks. We're already fast and furious into 2025, right?
We are. So we're off to the races in 2025. We've got now, for those of you listening, we've got some amazing guests lined up for you. This is the first time that you've ever experienced Beyond the Drip. Let me maybe orientate you for just a second. We come at infusion from a quadrant standpoint, meaning that we have Brandon on here, and he is our tech and data solutions person. We've got Paula Roth. She's our revenue cycle management expert. We've got Pam from our nursing and our actual just care of patient side and clinical side. And then finally, Brian O'Sullivan comes from our payer and credentialing side. So what our hope to do is as we go, we're able to put together content for infusion and specialty pharmacy and specialty infusion across the country for owners and directors and people who are leading orgs. We want to go and tackle the subjects that you're thinking about. And we want to provide guests and information that help you grow your business and help grow our industry. And let's just be honest, help care for people. In the end, we all come back to this place where we have to come our North Star, right? Pam says it all the time, care for our patients, right? At the end of the day, we want to make people better. Lots of frustrations, but guys, I'm so excited. You know, we've got big guests coming, but I want to stop for a second. This month, it's January 2025. And I want to do two things. I want to start by looking back and just having a little bit of a conversation on 2024. When you look back to 2024, what were the things that really stood out? And I want to have a broad conversation for a couple minutes. And we picked out three things that when we say, listen, 2024 was this crazy year, but I think every year is a crazy year, right? I just think that we're at that place where I had a friend tell me, we're just kind of in a constant trauma. And when we get through one trauma, the next trauma happened. And I'm like, it's totally it. That's 100%. So in all of our, so healthy wise, we're going to look back at last year's trauma and then we're just going to dissect it. It's going to be awesome. So I really like, so Paula, I'll probably come to you first as our revenue cycle expert with ProChant. When I think of 2024, I think of Change Healthcare. Paula, I think of the day that everything stood still and we began to say that too big to fail came to healthcare. So you've been leading Rev Cycle for a long time. I want you to look back in 2024 and give me what happened. And I just talk me through change.
It was a day that I think some providers are still actually trying to recover from. So with the cyberattack, right? We couldn't do test claims. We couldn't retrieve ERNs. I mean, revenue cycle stopped. But patient care was definitely slowed, right? If you're trying to take a new patient on and you need real-time access through Change Healthcare, I mean, we just couldn't work. We were quickly moving and adapting to take care of patients. And then immediately thereafter, working to figure out how do we get our transactions to our payers, right? With our biggest clearinghouse just stopped. The impact of that, quickly turning to risk mitigation, a lot of providers probably didn't transition all of their work back through Change Healthcare, right? In the event, should it happen again, we, I would say, diversified our number of vendors that we use for those transactions. So you can adapt more quickly, you can change. If you're sending something through Change one way and something happens, it's easier when you already have the contracts in place, processes in place to move to another vendor quickly. So some providers will probably never go all in. Some large providers will never go all in with one vendor again, I think, in that situation.
It leads to a question that as we talk about change and just the craziness as that was, Brandon, when I think of tragedies, there's this thought that progress is built on the back of tragedies. and no one wants to think about it, right? But most of the planes stay in the sky because of what we learned from the ones that fell, right? You know, most of the bridges that are still up 100 years ago are based upon what we learned for the ones 200 years ago that fell down, right? It's not a great thought, I get it, but it's the natural. Can we learn? But have we learned, Brandon, from Change Healthcare? Will we really diversify and get better for this?
I mean, yes and no, right, John? So what I see is like Paula said, there was a lot of diversification. You know, we saw in some of the software systems that we support, they were singularly based on change. And they had to drop everything, even things that they hadn't developed in years, you know, and give other options, which is great. But then it also exposed the fact that these ancillary providers of service were also based off of change, right? They were just like a second middleman. So I think what it did do is it exposed a real problem in our health system, realizing that there's such a concentration of PHI in one provider, right? And so much of our health system pivots on this one spoke. And, you know, it allowed there to be open conversations and thoughts of, you know what, we might need to bust this up a little bit and have redundancies in our system that aren't solely dependent upon one organization. You know, I think about the fact that, you know, already so many payers are slow to play. And here's these pharmacies that are like, well, guys, I mean, you know, we got to take care of patients. And so now we're taking on this additional risk with no understanding of whether or not we're going to get paid and how long it's going to take. You know, I think Paul is right. I think there's still, you know, there's still a tail end on this that is yet to be seen. You know, I think back to those early days when they're like, oh, we're offering, you know, providers, you know, I think it was $50,000 interest-free loan. And you're like,
wait, what was that?
So my Previs dispense I did 2 hours ago is covered, but nothing else?
Damn, how many IVIG scripts is that? Hey, we're going to give you 50,000. Like, that's a script and a half. Appreciate it. You're like, give me a break. I don't want to sit here all day because Lord knows you guys know I love to, you know, pin the tail on the payer. And so it's one of my favorite things to do, but we do have to keep the conversation moving. But I agree. Change Healthcare, huge thing. Pam, I'm going to come to you on this one. Maybe it's every year. It sure feels like the year of natural disasters, right? And we're going right into that. But I'm thinking about North Carolina and Baxter, you know, as you think about, and I know that this is a big part of your heart, how do we get, you know, the things that people need for their therapy? How did that hit you?
It was tough. If you think about it, you know, it was 5 or 6 years before with the hurricane in Puerto Rico, you know, so we moved stuff inland and all of a sudden you had this giant hole in the market, but the hospitals, you know, they're on top tier for supply. They don't realize when they're pushing these patients out to home that we in the home and the clinic side don't have the same access to product as they do. The amount of labor that goes into reformulating a TPN or however you've got to do it just because, you know, one shortage or another from literally from week to week. Some of these patients are being reformulated just to make sure that we have enough product for whatever happens to be available, you know, whatever 57 herbs and spices. It's been really hard. And we have these chronic patients at home. They will bounce back to the hospital if the product isn't there. I've heard stories about patients that have extreme short gut that have been in the hospital weeks to months because there was no supply for home with their provider. Yeah,
that bill should be great, right? Can't wait to get that 3 weeks I had to be in the hospital only because I can't get the IV, you know, fluid that I need. So, I mean,
who puts the bill for that if it's not medical necessity?
Yeah.
If it's a supply thing.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a great question.
That's what we'll go on for a while.
I think that we could say that, you know, we'll go back to, you know, payers, right? I'm not certain the payers are going to say, hey, you know, a hurricane hit, that's fine. We'll take this one on the chin. I don't think that's really what they're going to do, right? And so I mean, definitely a year that felt weird. And when it came to, we have change, and then we have the second biggest story we picked out was, of course, the shortage coming out of North Carolina and how that affected people. And if you think it affected, it didn't. It was nationwide. I mean, people are trying to find stuff nationwide. And again, It's about caring for people. And, we're not even get into the fact that some of those materials went to beauty treatments and hangover treatments instead of chronic illnesses. So we're not even going to get started there. But it's one part is that, hey, some folks took that out of the market, which is pretty hard. And I think at some point, somebody from a regulation, should look at that and say, regulation wise, no, we can't do that anymore. So, but I want to finish up, Brian, with you looking back in 2024 before we move to 2025, and another year of consolidation. I think back, I don't know, 6-7 years ago when it felt like someone was being bought every day, right? That was the big run for, if you remember back in the day, the BioScript run, and you had all of these runs that were going. You had our folks out of Philly, Brandon, that merged with BioScript. Infusion Solutions or no? Home Solutions purchasing, and then of course you had Option Care coming in, and it was just like every day it was like, hey, if you had a $5, $6, $8 million pharmacy, it was like, good luck, man. You're going to get a person at your door with a check, and you're going to say, yeah, I got to do it. Brian, it felt like we're back there again in some ways.
We are, for sure. But hey, just want to pause. The coach and trainer always kind of do a post session of roses and thorns, right? So the roses of 2024 is sort of like America is a great country, right? The scandals, the adversity, we're all still here. And we're all in business and doing this podcast because the markets, the private equity markets, the banks, the entrepreneurs, our customers and clients, healthcare providers continue to show up at work, continue to invest, continue to grow. Drug manufacturers keep innovating. And we're all here as part of that. Nobody quit or shut down, even after the Change Healthcare and hurricanes. So kind of give ourselves as an industry a pat on the back of we were resilient, right? So lots of roses. Some of the thorns, which always is the news, right? As you mentioned, the consolidation, right? Unfettered by any regulatory concerns by the FTC or Department of Justice. There was the issue with the PBM report of no fiduciary alignment with their employers, Medicare, Medicaid, and then also just really a double standard with Stark. That the providers can do things or payers can do things that providers can't. And then I thought, an unfair treatment of Steward Healthcare and private equity investment of now we're going to scrutinize private equity investment in providers only because of one failure. Our politicians tend to be really hard on healthcare providers and give payers a real pass on consolidation, regulatory issues. Yesterday, there was just news. Again, I know we're talking about 2024, but 2025, some pretty minor, $100,000 or $1 million fines for Medicare marketing issues. But as a regulatory body, they're going over speed bumps, and providers go over hurdles.
Yeah.
So I think that disparity is troubling to me for 2024 and probably into 2025.
It's probably a good bridge to 2025, right? Looking back though on 2024, I mean, I think the three biggest ones were the consolidation, the fact that the payers seem to get a pass and all that, and we have so much. We can talk more about that. Natural disasters and shortages, and then finally change. And let's just be honest. I mean, change dominated, right? There was nothing. There was nothing in our industry or in healthcare that change didn't dominate. And I know that maybe the common person who's walking around who's not in healthcare every day is like, yeah, I'm sure it's some type of a deal. It's like it was just the story, and so that dominated. But looking to 2025 for our listeners, people have sent me messages, and we've had so many conversations around, when I ask, hey, what are you looking from the Beyond the Drip podcast going forward, and they'll say, hey, we're looking for you guys to tell us the things we're maybe not like. What should we be thinking about now? Where should we be looking around corners? So Brian, I'm going to kind of snake and stay with you in this idea of consolidation, particularly and I'll challenge you a little bit here on the payer side. Payers staying in our markets. And I think it's interesting that you said, we seem to have this huge problem with medical providers, but not with payers. And I think that's an easy question because who has the better lobbyists? That's it. The payers have the better lobbyists, right? So that's why. But as you looked at 2025, you think about our listeners, they're made up of, pharmacists, directors, owners, entrepreneurs, men and women thinking about getting into here. You're thinking about, hey, do I go sink 10 million of my cash and go start Infusion? What are you looking and what do you want us to be paying attention to in 20?
Yeah, one of the things the leftover from 2024 that I hope, out of a tragedy, something, the execution murder of the CEO of United Healthcare, wrongly started a conversation, about profit margins in that industry. So hopefully that tragedy, there's some daylight there because it's a profitable industry. So moving to that, I'm looking at something I pulled up and won't share screen, but there's something in the financials of insurance companies now that's been around, but it's become massively significant. So it's called eliminations. So if an insurance company takes in $1 of premium, they pay themselves. So they have a home infusion company, they have a specialty pharmacy, they own a surgery center, they employ a physician, they have a hospice company. I mean, they're in pretty much anything other than hospitals, with the exception of Kaiser. I don't think a health plan owns a hospital. So of the big ones, I'll go smallest to biggest. Anthem, although they're growing, pays themselves 18 cents out of every dollar they take in. So they can't count revenue 2 or 3 times, so they take out 18 cents. Cigna, almost 25 cents on the dollar, primarily through Evernorth. United is up to almost 49% through Optum and other subsidiaries. And then at the top of the chart is 49.5% Aetna pays themselves out of their premium. And that just seems wrong in the context of how handcuffed providers are under Stark and how non-transparent. If you asked somebody on the street, hey, you have United Healthcare insurance and you go to a provider, the odds are almost 50% that you're going to a provider that United owns. Do you know that as United insured?
Right.
And I didn't know.
Right.
I mean, I had a suspicion, but I wouldn't have guessed 50 cents on the dollar. So I think we need a lot of daylight on that.
Yeah, and listen, we'll probably talk a lot about this. Let's not bury the lead, right? You guys know that there's a new person in the White House. You probably have heard. You may have seen it. I don't know. And so I'm sure this will be woven through our conversation. But listen, I don't know. What are we in? We're recording this on the 24th. It'll be out next week. Are we like 5 days into this thing? It feels like, it's been a lot. Like 700 executive orders, 7,000 hallelujahs or 7,000 the world's going to end. And those of us in the middle are like, we're just going to go back to work because it's not going to end. So obviously, it's going to, do you see, this administration, do you see them looking at this? This is a populist administration, right? There's a mandate to go out there and say, you can go make money. It's got to be fair. It's got to be fair, and it can't be just gratuitous on the backs, right? So do you see anything there?
I see this administration as being somewhat unpredictable, right? It's a Republican administration, but it's also not an ideologue type of, Trump's like a man of surprise, right? And his leaders are, and he's pulled people from across the aisle and people that, you got Mark Zuckerberg hanging out in the White House.
It was odd.
So yeah. I think he's really trying to do what's right for the country. And I know that's probably unpopular to a lot of people. So I really don't know, but to the extent that this isn't really good for consumers, I think it'll get a look.
Yeah, I don't know. And listen, and I'll play it right down the middle. I don't know if what he's doing is right for the company. I do think he probably believes it is.
That's all I was saying.
I know what you mean. What I'll say is, I like your description of it's unpredictable. Like I don't think it's business as usual. Let's say that. So, if you would have told me Republican A or Democrat B would be there, I'd say, we're not going to get any change to the payers next year. We'll get a little bit of this and that. But we are now in an administration that is willing, whether right or wrong, depending on where you are, to dramatically change something. And that is not in the past much happened. So it hasn't. So I agree with you on the Stark Law thing. It'll be interesting to see, is this going to be too much for them to say, you cannot pay yourself 50 cents on a dollar. You're robbing Peter to pay Paul here, and you're doing it at the expense of the American person. This is, again, a populist group. So that's something to pay attention to, I think, and maybe even lobby for. It'll be interesting. Pam, I'm going to come to you next. We've talked a lot about 2024, but again, asking you to put, get out your crystal ball here, 35 years in this industry, working almost every type of thing. What are you paying attention to in 2025?
Expansion both of providers, independent providers. I mean, it's just mushroomed, but also products. I mean, the growth of biologic products is exponential, and it's really hard to keep up with the pace of development if you run an independent center. And the advice I can give to people is keep your staff current. A lot of people don't realize the wealth of knowledge that's on a manufacturer's website. And many people don't utilize the reps from the company for education on new products. I would take advantage of that every turn I got if I owned a clinic. And of course, I'm going to beat the drum again. Oncology is coming for independent sites of service, both home and AICs. And last year, with the ASCO ONS collaboration on the chemotherapy and biotherapy guidelines, they dumbed it down. It's a bullet-pointed roadmap for what they want us to do to take care of patients. And if you haven't seen it and you don't have access to it, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to provide it, because it draws a picture for us for what they want us to do to keep the patients safe. And it is very concise. And the narrative is really good with explanation. I'm using it to format a lot of my policies and procedures now. It's been very, very helpful. And training. We do need to make sure when we onboard new products that people are trained. You have to have a good process with a clinical person in your organization to help you evaluate the products for safety. What do the staff need to get up to speed so we can take care of the patients? Do you have the infrastructure? Have you got the pump? Whatever it is. And also, is it a hazardous product? Or is it a high acuity drug? What does this patient need for monitoring? Sure, I might be able to give it, but I have the infrastructure to actually collaborate with the oncology practice, whether it's labs or follow-ups or whatever.
Yeah, Pam, you make such a good point. And maybe back to Brian's, because I think we want to be fair here, right? We're not a Republican, Democrat. We're not a left, right. We're business people, right? We're caregivers. Want to be fair. Maybe the payers would argue, you guys don't understand when you have that many drugs come in. You don't. You don't understand. You think that we can. It's a wild west right now. Every drug that comes out, it's $43,000 a dose. Like, are you kidding me? And the pharma companies are charging and maybe the payers' response. And I think one day, hell will freeze over, and we'll have a payer on, right? And we'll get to talk to them, and maybe they, yeah, okay, all right. Maybe they would say, you guys are being short-sighted. We'd be out of business tomorrow if we paid you on every single drug, and then we'd all be on a single payer system, and you'd hate it. So I think but I want to shift on Pam's topic. But Paul, I'll bring you in, VP of Ops for ProChant, large infusion, specialty infusion, revenue cycle management company. You're the tip of the spear when it comes to revenue cycle management. You just heard Pam talk about this. She's looking at all these new drugs that are coming out, and everybody who calls her and says, I think I want to do this drug. What should they be thinking about rev cycle? Because that feels even more Wild West. Like, hey, we're going to go out and do a brand new biologic. And somebody's like, what makes your ears stand up when you start hearing that?
Yeah, I mean, touched on it for sure. Manufacturer websites have a wealth of information on them, right? And we don't use that enough in RevCycle and probably other spaces. What I think about there is there's a lot of decisions to be made about everything that Pam said clinically, right? But then when these new drugs come to market, payers likely not have developed their internal guidelines around medical necessity, pre-auth. The payers, I know it's happened, I dealt with it. They don't know yet what they need to process the referral request or pay the claim. The risk to the provider is, you want to take the patient, you want to, take care of the patient, service the patient, but it's really difficult to do that when you don't know if you're going to get paid for the drug, right? With these high dollar drugs. So yeah, definitely a challenge. I think finding solutions and how to work through that in 2025 is probably going to be top of mind for a lot of us when we're here in Rev Cycle.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And Paul, I'll probably stay with you for a second as you think about 2025. Piggybacking on that, it was funny. We began planning this episode in December, and you had an idea on what you were looking for, and then we had a pre-planning meeting, and your idea changed. I want you to walk us through, because I think it helps. It'll help our listeners understand just how 3 weeks, how things have changed in the mind of a national rev cycle leader. Start back in December. Okay, go back to December. What were you thinking when I look at 2025? What were you thinking about?
2025, the Medicare prescription payment plan, January 1, 2025. So it's a law coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. In 2025, Medicare prescription drug plans are required to offer enrollees the option to either pay out of pocket for their prescriptions like we do right now. Like you walk in, get a prescription, pay your copay right now. Or the option to pay the cost share in a monthly kind of capped payment plan, right? That was supposed to take off in 2025. That was it. We were supposed to do it. So in December, I was planning for that. How do we make sure that our providers understand that? How do we make sure that we're notifying patients? There's some onus on providers to make sure the patients are aware. So I was planning to make sure, that we had a smooth process notifying the providers that we worked with and making sure that we can cover our piece of that project. Not only ProChamp customers, ProChamp clients.
But we stand here on January 24th, and what are you thinking now?
Right. So a couple of weeks in here, just having my coffee and, watching the morning news, and I see an executive order to stop funding for IRA. Now, that was a big law. It wasn't all just about healthcare, right?
Right.
So because that was a bundled law and there's other things that are, we're trying, the current administration is trying to understand, stop, change, whatever that may be. I think the healthcare part of it could potentially get wrapped up in that, right? So while in December, I was planning to make sure that we have a good plan to make sure this prescription plan, MP3 is what the short term is that we're using, but to make sure that process goes smoothly. And now I'm like, no, what if our whole part of IRA in healthcare changes, which it's likely. Right? I mean, I don't want to think that I know what our current administration is thinking, but because it's a part of a bigger bundled law, there could be some impact to how we've worked for a couple of years to, roll out parts of the IRA.
Yeah, and I think that's really wise. And I mean, to wrap up for our listeners, I mean, you have this rev cycle leader at ProChant saying 3 weeks ago I was ready to tell you this, and now I have no idea what to tell you. And so in 2025, you better be nimble, because I can tell you what I think. I think that the water's poison to them, and anything that came out of the Biden camp, they want to get rid of. And there's no question whether, again, we play the middle here. Okay, we play the middle here. So I don't want to hear about whether you're right or left. I just want to tell you that if that's the case, something good will get thrown out with the bad. They will. It always does. It always does.
That was my point, and it's not. We still have to work. I mean, we still have to do what we have to do to take care of our patients, to make sure we're compliant. We understand what this all means in our rev cycle world. But planning for 2025 looks a little different, and being nimble is exactly what you said. It has to happen, right? We don't know. We need to stay abreast, keep informed, and stay nimble.
Yeah, I would definitely think that everybody listening should listen to all these leaders when they say find sources of news and information and read them often, because they're going to change. This year particularly, we have an administration that wants to make a mark. Listen, we talked about the first 100 days. It feels like we're 90 days in. We're like 4 days in. I mean, they are rolling. And so I don't know. I mean, and I don't mean rolling. I just mean they're rolling through and doing things quickly. I definitely think that's a big portion. Turning to you, Brandon, kind of finishing our conversation about what your, MedEdge Solutions, leading, tech company in infusion, and what are you looking at when you say, okay, 2025, what corners are you looking around? What are you looking for?
Yeah, John. So I think the biggest thing that we're seeing and hearing from folks is utilizing AI in their business. And to some, AI. I saw things like investing in AI, learning about what AI is today is like Bitcoin in 2013, right? It's you hear it, but you don't quite understand it. But in 10 years, it could be 1,000 times more powerful, right? And
Right.
so we're seeing a lot of folks try to integrate AI into what they do without understanding the cons, right? And so there's a lot of pros, right? Like being able to do these tedious tasks of I've talked with folks who are like, yeah, we're in certain instances where we're allowed to, we're utilizing AI to do benefits investigation, to do calls back to prescribers, to read off of referral forms and enter it into our EMR and all these different types of things. And I was talking with a client the other day, and he was showing me, we use, Chat GPT to do X, Y, and Z. And I said, well, that's great. And he showed it to me. And I said, but you do realize you're using the base level, Chat GPT. And he goes, well, yeah, that's all we need. I said, you don't understand. That data goes out to the crowdsourcing. So all that data you just put in goes out to the crowdsource, and that data contains PHI. You have to be careful with those types of things because, again, it's great, but if you don't understand the risks, and John, let's just be honest, when we talked about Change Healthcare, right? Having that information, that concentration of information is a huge, huge target, right? It's not a matter of if, but when it happens again. The next big thing is going to be these AI repositories of data and ends up happening. I mean, not only from a provider standpoint, but what happens when patients start throwing their information into ChatGPT, right? And trying to make sense of what does this mean, right? Like I'm going to start using ChatGPT as my own PCP to try and take my labs and all this and get a diagnosis. Like there's
or understand my rev cycle, right? I'll just throw in my diagnosis codes and everything, and you just spilled PHI all over a public crowdsourced thing that I don't think everybody knows. That when you use that, you look in there and you say, hey, one of the reasons it gets better is because it's constantly using everybody's data to get better, right? And so that's completely terrifying. But here's the thing, right? We talk about like, why are there so many cops at New Year's Eve in New York City? Because there's so many people.
Right.
And so why? Because wherever the most value is the highest target. We are collecting the highest data targets in the world. And the funny thing about this is that our enemies, our hackers, will use AI to go hack into the AI repository.
Right. Yeah.
And so you've got to build AI. So it's going to be like the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. Like our AI is trying to fight off your AI, So, but yeah, I mean, Brandon, I know that all of our clients want, different clients and different people with listeners want to use AI. But what would you tell them about like the buzzword that currently, I got to get to AI?
New does not mean improved, right? And it's not what you have, it's how you use it. And so, making sure that you understand the risks, what you actually have versus what you think you have, and bringing in experts, right? Like, trust me, you think it's expensive to bring in somebody who knows what they're talking about? Wait till you find out what the bill is for you screwing something up, like releasing PHI through the AI, right? Like, we talk with folks all the time that say, gosh, if I had a dime for every time I've heard we're not wrong until we're told we're wrong, still doesn't mean that it doesn't come with a bill, right? And it's like, well, just because I know I sped through the school zone, but I didn't get pulled over, right? Well, that's just great. Go ahead and do that, and then hit a kid, and then find out, and you go, well, I've done this a dozen times before. That doesn't matter. This time you got caught.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. And quite frankly, your intent doesn't matter either. Right. Just because I did not intend to harm doesn't mean that you won't harm, right? And your lack of thinking ahead doesn't mean that. So let's switch over here to Paula and Pamela in this conversation, kind of as we wrap up. Pam, we'll go with you, and then Paula. Pam, do you see AI playing a role in caring for patients?
I do. I've actually seen some nursing forums where nurses are trying to discern different things about IV catheters and
Sure.
what do you do in this case or that case, and getting incorrect information. And if they don't have a North Star, if they don't have the source of information that they should be going by, which is the INS, IGNS, standards of practice, ONS standards of practice, if they don't have that they refer to, anything else crowdsourced is going to be what I call normalization of deviance, which is we've always done it this way. And it's kind of like playing telephone, where the story at the end of the line of kids is much different than it was at the beginning. And as knowledge is passed down, I call it delusional knowledge. Things get lost in transmission, and it's very dangerous.
Yeah.
Now, would you say AI in clinical care is a lot like a clinical trial, where we're still in experiment mode and informed consent isn't complete because we really don't know what we're getting into these days, right?
I think it's kind of like using Google for your doctor.
Yeah.
The answer is always cancer. That's always the diagnosis.
100%. I have something wrong, and you're within 3 clicks of finding out that you have a cancer diagnosis. But here, you know, before I get to kind of wrapping up, Paul, I want to come to you on this one. You know, you lead RevCycle. How do you see AI? I know ProChant is one of the most tech-driven revenue cycle management companies on the planet, because I know their leadership. I know how good they are. Like, what are you guys thinking about when you think of AI and how to responsibly help folks get paid?
Yeah, in the rev cycle space, John, I think the opportunities are endless, right? I mean, there's so many things right now that just driving workflow and serving the right work to the right people at the right time. And, you know, there's so many cool things with AI right now we can do in the rev cycle space. It's not it's not taking care of patients, right? That's the thing. You know, it's different coming from the clinical side and you know, there's a lot more risk there. I think in the rev cycle side, opportunities are endless and exciting. You know, we do a lot of things still manually today in the rev cycle world, and not just ProChant, but I know coming from a lot of different rev cycle organizations, we're still like manually signing out work on Excel files, and you know, we're still doing some pretty labor intensive things with all the technology that we have today. And I think the opportunity here is increased efficiency at like exponentially. I mean, there's so much opportunity here. The things that Brandon talked about concern me a little bit, right? Is making sure we're using it smart. We know what we're getting into, security and all of those things. I think that all is extremely important, but I think done right, AI will be a game changer in rev cycle.
Yeah, John, and one of the things too, I'm sorry, but you know, while we have AI and people are embracing it, what's also very interesting is how we're seeing some organizations say, hey, listen, you can't use AI on us, right? You can't use AI to call and do benefits verification. You can't use AI to call and find out where payment is on invoices and things like that. You know, and those are 2 payer examples, right? And everything. But, you know, even so much as I've seen where doctors' offices and stuff say you can't use that to call and get, you know, clarification on orders and things like that. Because quite frankly, AI can, you know, we have 8 billion plus people on this planet. You take AI and start doing that. I mean, you could have, you know, the equivalent of 16 billion in an instant because it scales up so fast. And so now people who are doing things manually and can we just be honest, archaically, will just be absolutely drowned by the tidal wave of what AI could do for other organizations who embrace it. So, you know, there's this dichotomy here of the old versus the new, and the old could absolutely be wiped out and overrun by AI.
Yeah, I like it. Well, there you have it, folks. 2025 off to a bang. We've got a brand new administration in the White House. Things are changing rapidly. What are we looking at in 2025? We're looking at the Stark Law restrictions around consolidation and how payers will continue to seem to escape that a little bit, while medical providers will still have their feet held to the fire on that one. And we're looking at onboarding new drugs and new therapies. How are we going to do it? How are we going to get paid for it? and all the ways in which we need to grow our businesses. We have no idea whether there's an Inflation Reduction Act or not. We figured that out. There might be or there might not be. There might be today. Tomorrow there might not be. So stay tuned. You may wake up Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern. There's an IRA, and Monday at 9 a.m. no IRA. So what we have to do is we have to stay in tune, and we have to make sure that we're very, very educated on every single piece of our infusion business. And AI is awesome, but it has to be real, it has to be right, and it can be dangerous. So, my message, I think, to the infusion industry is no one is neutral on a moving train, and you're on a moving train. And there'll be some times this year that you say, I'll sit right here and be the same. We're going 80 miles per hour down the road. Every time you stand around, you're a half mile down the road. So you got to keep your eyes up. We've got to continue. Man, I'm so thankful for my co-host, Brian O'Sullivan Group, one of the best leaders in the country around payer credentialing, Pam McIntyre, Expert Nursing Solutions, traveling the country, helping people with policies, procedures, helping people with nursing, trained nursing, and open up and get better at actually caring for patients. Paula Roth, VP of Operations for ProChant, all things revenue cycle. Call her. Let her educate you on all things on how to get actually paid. And finally, Brandon Carpenter, MedEdge, tech, data, all things I have no idea about. I'm so appreciative of all you guys, and so appreciative of everybody who listens to us. We broke records last month, and we're already on our way to breaking records this month with an incredible 2025 plan with great guests and topics. And so wishing you all a happy new year and excited to go get it, and probably see all you beautiful people. And we have some special stuff planned in Washington, D.C. in about 60 days at National Home Infusion Association. So guys, thanks so much for your contribution, and thanks so much for your humor and your friendship, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.